friends, welcome back to the channel. I am the GM Philosopher. Thank you so much for stopping by. Today we are talking about my favorite house rules. I was asked this question and I need to give a shout out to Twin Steel, who basically said they are collecting all the house rules on YouTube for D&D and asked me about mine. And I do have a few that I think are awesome and I use them all the time. So I'm going to go through them today and share those rules with you and why I think they're the best house rules and why we use them at my table and why I think they have withstood the test of time and really continue to be house rules that I use over and over again. So the first one is what I call heroic dice. And basically what this means is whenever players are rolling up a character, either a new character or leveling up a character, then every time they roll hit dice, they roll for the hit dice, whether it be the D8, the D10, whatever, if the dice roll is less than one above half the number represented on the dice, it automatically defaults up to one above half. So in other words, if you're rolling a D8 for hit dice and you roll a 3, it'll automatically default up to a 5, which is one above 4, one above half. If they're rolling a D10 and they roll a 3, it'll automatically default up to a 6, and so on. And by the way, this happens before the con modifier is applied. So you get to roll, move up to one above half if you rolled less than that, then add your con modifier on top of that if you have one. If you have a negative con modifier and that takes you down below the halfway point, well, that is not fixed by this rule, and you're just going to have lower hit points because of it. It's a consequence of not eating your Wheaties and doing push-ups, I guess. The reason I use this rule is because I don't want players to have needlessly weakened character HP levels due to really bad luck in rolling dice. Anyway, this is a house rule that is so common at my table now that all my players just automatically do it whenever they do it. And we don't even have to talk about it anymore because this is so well established. All right. My second house rule that I run, and this is really ever since 5th edition comes out, is that I sometimes use 3rd edition reincarnation. Now, hear me out. I'm going to explain what I mean by this. In the game, if the party is going to a contemporary reincarnationist, right? They're going to go see a druid. And this druid has been to modern college and they are contemporary and they practice more modern magic, cool magic like the cool kids. Then they're probably going to get 5th edition version of reincarnation. For those of you who don't know, reincarnation is a spell lets you touch a dead humanoid or piece of a dead humanoid, provided it's not been dead for longer than 10 days and basically bring it back to life in a new form. In 5th edition, this is a 5th level transmutation. It's relatively expensive still, 1,000 gold pieces worth of rare oils and unguents. But the list of things that you get reincarnated as is relatively conservative. You can come back basically as a dragonborn, a hill dwarf, a mountain dwarf, a dark elf, a high elf, a wood elf, a forest gnome, a rock gnome, a half elf, half orc, lightfoot halfling, stout halfling, human, or tiefling. Taking into account that, you're probably playing a humanoid, coming back as a different type of humanoid isn't a huge transition. Yes, perhaps a little bit jarring, but not super jarring. With that being said, in my games, if you go to someone who practices the old magic, the old lady in the forest, if you go to that wizard who's slightly insane that people are kind of afraid of, who lives in a rickety tower, if you find a scroll of reincarnation in an old ruin, you're probably going to get 3rd edition reincarnation, even in 5th edition. Why, you ask? Well, for those of you who've played 3rd edition, you know exactly why. But for those of you who haven't, let me educate you. Now, it should be known that all the other elements of the spell I treat just like the 5th edition version. The only thing that I do treat differently is the random roll table of the stuff you come back as. And let me tell you, 3rd edition Reincarnate was a wild spell, and you basically roll on a D100 and listen to some of the stuff you come back as, or that you can come back as. Badger, a black bear, a brown bear, a boar, a centaur, a dryad, an eagle, an elf, gnome, hawk, halfling, human, leopard, owl, pixie, satyr, sprite, wolf, wolverine, or if they roll triple zeros, it is DM's choice. I have totally had players come back as capuchin monkeys. So yeah, in my games, if you're going to anyone from the old ways to cast reincarnate, you're getting the 3rd edition version. because I think it's just awesome and it's so cool. All right. Next house rule that I love. If you do cool roleplay stuff, you'll probably get to fudge the rules a little bit, but you'll probably need to make a check, usually dexterity, to see if it's possible. One really good example of this is I one time had a character who was in a very bad situation. He was actually facing an aboleth in his secret lair. He had built like an underground secret lair, and he had been doing stuff down there that attracted the attention of an aboleth who actually plane shifted and showed up in his lair and was trying to take control of the army of sentient pop bots he was cultivating there. That's a wild story for another time in itself. But the fact that an aboleth showed up and he was by himself with his army of pop bots who were relatively actually at this point convinced to join the aboleth. He was looking at a very bad situation, but he had a rather ingenious idea. Now, I believe at the time he was like a level 10 character. There was no way in traditional combat he was going to overcome this aboleth and make it out of there alive. There was just no way. But he did have a rather ingenious solution. He had on him 2 bags of holding, and he said, what if I take one bag of holding and I throw it, and then I take the other and I throw it as well, and then I raise my bow and I try to shoot through both bags of holding, get one to go through the other one, and then take the aboleth out in a multiple bag of holding implosion. Now, some of you might be wondering, well, what's the point of this? Well, in case you didn't know, when one bag of holding is placed inside another bag of holding or punctured within it, the result is catastrophic. The interaction creates a tear in the fabric of space, leading to a rift that sucks both bags and their contents into the astral plane. All items stored within the bags are lost, and the bags themselves are destroyed in the process. This event can also potentially cause a significant disturbance in surrounding area, depending on the dungeon master's discretion. And in my games, I've always treated the destruction of bags of holding as definitely a catastrophic event. In other words, there was a very good chance that this was going to create, if he could pull it off, that this was going to create a tear in the fabric of reality that would literally suck the aboleth to the astral plane, and possibly the character himself. Also, it was probably going to collapse his underground lair, which could also kill him in the process. However, the fact that he came up with this unique solution to this problem, while really cool, was technically not useful if we were to follow the rules as written, because there would be several checks and it would take several turns to actually pull it off. If we were going to play rules as written, he would have to throw a bag. That would take an action. He would have had to throw another bag, which would have taken another action, and then he would have had to have shot his arrow. Now, I can't exactly remember even what class he was playing, but let's just say he even had 2 attacks. Maybe he could throw both bags in one turn, and then on the next turn he could shoot his arrow. He was not playing a fighter, so he did not have action surge. However, it just wasn't going to be possible, and if he did not kill the aboleth in the first turn, he was pretty sure he was going to be dead before his second one, which was true. Now, because it was such a cool idea, and because it was so resourceful, and because this was a very cinematic moment, I decided to follow my house rule. Cool roleplay house rule. This was cool enough. I liked it enough. You know what? I'm going to fudge the rules, but you have to make a dexterity check to see if you can be fast enough to make it. I gave him a decently difficult dexterity check. Basically, he needed to make, just a basic dexterity check just to make sure he didn't, one mistake and it wasn't going to work, right? So he makes this dexterity check. He rolls great, throws the bags, has to shoot. There's a pretty high DC on hitting the bags with the arrow, but he did manage to do it, and he pulled it off. And what ended up happening was the aboleth did get shunted to the astral plane. His lair did collapse on him, and he spent the next 2 to 3 days digging himself out by hand, trying his best to crawl upward through the rubble. He did manage to escape without dying, but he took significant damage, and it was one heck of a story. This brings us to my 4th and final house rule that I usually run, and players get a choice in this, and I'll explain what this means. When characters die the first time, I usually give them the option to be a ghost. Now, here's what this means. In fact, this recently happened in my game I'm running right now. One of the characters got shot with a ray of disintegration from a dragonborn priest They failed their save, they took an incredible amount of damage, and they died. Seeing as how they were a level 4 character is not surprising. Now, when they died and their body crumbled to little bits of dust on the ground from the disintegration, they rose from the ashes as a specter, as a ghost, a translucent bluish ghost, but nobody could see them or hear them. Now, basically what this amounts to is they float around and they can hear what people are doing. They can go where they want, but they cannot interact with their environment, and they can't communicate with the party unless the party uses some kind of magical means to communicate with them. They can't cast spells, they can't take actions, they can't do anything, with some exceptions. They can try to make rolls to do things like knock something off a table or maybe touch someone, sort of like poltergeist type activity, right? They're basically a ghost spirit. And the other party, they have to make rolls to see if there's some kind of possibility that they catch glimpses of this, ghostly character, or maybe hear them or something. One of the characters actually rolled a crit and was able to see and hear the specter and communicate with her, but the others could not, and they were basically calling him crazy until the wizard of the party cast see invisibility, and then he had to make a spot check, and he was actually able to sort of discern the specter floating. So, he could kind of confirm that this character was indeed not crazy and that they were talking to their deceased friend, who then relayed the story and yada, yada, yada. So the reason I do this is because it creates such an incredible possible story arc for continuing that character. When they die the first time, they might be left with some trauma, some PTSD. They may, have revenge on the mind. They may now have a new inspiration for how they want to continue their life or mission. And a lot of times the players in my games really love their characters. And so to give them this one opportunity to maybe come back. But see, that's the thing. They maybe come back. They really can't take any action until they find a way to come back or until the party finds a way to come back. And the most tricky parts of this are when the party all fails their attempts to see this character. So this character literally just has to float around with them until they come across some manner of being able to communicate with them. And usually what happens is they end up communicating with other forces, entities first. And then it's just they have to run their own little side quest of being a floating spirit. So it's kind of boring. They're limited in their options. And here's the thing. They always have the option. They could either choose to stay and haunt, or they could choose to go on to the afterlife and roll up a new character. So they're not stuck as a spirit against their free will. They may remain as a spirit and try to come back. And I only allow this option on the first character death. Second character death, no more haunting, no more spirit time. You're just dead. Time to roll up a new character, unless they can find some way to bring you back, reincarnate you, etc. But you're not going to be floating around as a spirit in the meantime. All right, those are my 4 house rules. I hope that you have enjoyed this. Let me know what your house rules are, and if you have any suggestions for how I could possibly make these better. Thank you so much for watching. Give me a thumbs up and a subscribe. I really appreciate all of you out there. Thank you for coming back to my channel. Every day I'm posting content about the best game in the world, D&D, and how to make it better for everyone. So go run some D&D this week and weekend and have a great time. I will see you on the next one.